One of the biggest dramas on the internet for the past couple of years has been reading. When I was a kid, I always had my nose stuck in a book. And so when the pandemic hit and reading became cool and interesting, I was so happy because social media changed the narrative. But then TikTok came along and now we are back to square one. I'm pulling out my degree to present you with an essay on the topic, but keep in mind it's a politics degree, so manage your expectations. I'll give you a brief overview of what we're going to discuss because it's a lot and you should know what you're getting yourselves into. Of course, we'll first start with the negatives and we'll cover social media marketing and more specifically its impact on kids, the concept of women's literature, and how social media is changing publishing. We'll move on to the glorification of abuse and the blurring of lines between fiction and reality, followed by my favorite topics: classism, criticism, tropification, overconsumption, and echo chambers. And then we'll finish up with some positives. I thought we should get the more controversial topics out of the way first, which is why we're starting a little bit more dark. The major problem that I have with the overwhelming popularity of mainstream book talk is the lack of accountability for the content it promotes. On TikTok side, the app's user side, the marketers, publishers, and sellers. If you think about popular book talk books, what do you think of? I think of ACOTAR, Fourth Wing, Icebreaker, Colleen, Hoover. You get the gist. Well, what is the main thing they have in common? You get on the app and you look at videos recommending books, and they have smudge ratings, excerpts from books that are supposed to pique your interest, like when they're in the middle of doing it and his brother walks into the room. You okay with Lucas watching, Beauty? They continue, while his brother watches and gives them orders. Imagine if we did that with actual adult movies, trailers of adult films, ratings of adult films, and reviews on Porn Talk. And then you could go to the store and buy them and no one would ID you. How come you get ID'd when you go watch Deadpool and Wolverine, but no one cares when you buy Haunting Adeline? Hello? What are we doing? Now I know that these books are not only about corn, with some exceptions. Some of them actually have world building and plot and are interesting without the corn. But that doesn't diminish the fact that they do have adult content that children shouldn't have access to, the way they shouldn't have access to adult movies. We know children have access to adult movies. The internet exists. It's really hard to control what a teen consumes. Let's not live in a bubble and try to deny that. But first, parental control in and out of the home over a kid's internet consumption is getting progressively harder, which means that at some point, the responsibility should fall on the companies that produce and distribute adult content to protect children. And second, companies should not be profiting from their failure to protect children from exposure to adult content. I took this video on my last trip to Bulgaria. And as you can see, in the kids section, you have some middle grade books like Harry Potter. Then right next to them, you have the classic young adult book, ACOTAR. Then you have corn, corn, and corn. And then Winnie the Pooh. Can someone explain the logic behind this layout to me? Is it one for the baby, one for mommy? Or am I being a Karen? Influencers, publishers, Amazon, bookstores, they are all profiting from marketing and selling adult books to kids. A prime example of the desire to profit out of this is a change in book cover design. Years ago, adult books had covers such as these. You immediately knew what you were going to find in them. Now we either have colorful cartoons or just text with some simple swirly designs. Way not to grab the attention of children. Some people argue that since access to fan fictions is not restricted, it's the same. No, it's not. First, fanfic writers are not making a profit out of their works. Second, there is still a stigma attached to reading fanfics, and you rarely see anyone talk about them outside of the fanfic community or a specific fandom. Hence, they're not really promoted online, and unless you have prior knowledge they exist and you actively go out and search for them, you're not exposed. Third, you're forgetting about the little detail of language accessibility. I only got access to fanfics when I learned English, because not a lot of people write fanfics in Bulgarian. But traditionally published books are translated in various languages and they're easily accessible. And especially if it's a BookTok book, it gets translated and hits the shelves really quickly. Honestly, I could never read ACOTAR in Bulgarian because I gag at the translated smut. Because somehow, when it's in my native language, it hits me what I'm reading, and I'm like, ugh. Brother, ugh. Why is there a section in the bookstore labeled women's literature? What does that even mean? Initially, the idea was to bring forward female authors whose works had been ignored in the past because they were, well, written by women. It was also used to highlight the work of female authors, because the vast majority of the books considered classics were written by men. Since the 1970s, it has also been an academic discipline that proposes that women do indeed write differently than men, and they deserve to be studied on their own.
What will the future scholars see when they study us? A portrait of women today? There you are, ladies.
There's an interesting essay titled What Women's Literature by Minda Ray Amaran, which I highly recommend you read if you want to. In it, the English teacher says, I feel compelled to state that I find the present interest in women's literature degrading, and the teaching of women's literature in English departments a subversion of women's liberation. The whole point of leaving the doll's house, I would have thought, was to become a person among people, to be what one wanted to be. If one chose to be an English teacher, it was because one had an interest in literature. One didn't have to astonish the professors, or to decorate a campus, or to confine oneself to books on childbirth. If one chose to write fiction, it was because one wanted readers to say, "What a fine novel," not, "Oh, a woman." It should be clear that I'm not denying the value of studying the conventions of portraying women in a particular genre. It is also interesting to study the conventions of portraying landscape. But though people today are urgently concerned with the rights of scenery, we do not yet have courses in landscape literature. Today, women's literature is being conflated with young adult literature and trashy romances, which is kind of infantilizing women, treating women as less intelligent, and stigmatizing a whole genre all at the same time, while men read real and serious literature. And that's why they don't have their own section, because everything outside the women's literature section is smart and mature. But then if you read sci-fi or high fantasy, you're a pick-me. If you read classics, you're a poser. If you read history and politics, you're a know-it-all. Because gods forbid, how dare a woman even read? Definitely not a new concept. In 1855, Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote, America is now wholly given over to a damned mob of scribbling women, and I should have no chance of success while the public taste is occupied with their trash, and should be ashamed of myself if I did succeed. What is the mystery of these innumerable editions of The Lamplighter, and other books neither better nor worse? Worse they could not be, and better they need not be, when they sell by the hundreds of thousands. At the end of the day, this whole idea of women's literature has become yet another thing that pits men and women against each other. There's one argument that I hear going around quite often, and that is that men hate on women reading romance novels the way they always jump to hate on what big groups of women enjoy, like boy groups. Which is valid, but let's not pretend that in the past few decades, women have not done the same towards men who enjoy Star Wars, or video games, or Legos, and a vast amount of other things labeled as nerdy and geeky. In my experience growing up, I was teased a lot less for liking anime and fantasy than the boys were. God, I still have a vivid memory of when I was in middle school, and a magazine came out with a Harry Potter poster in it, and I was so excited about it. And so my parents bought it for me on the way to school, and a boy from my class took the poster out of the magazine and just ripped it. Anyway, I do have to point out that it was predominantly boys who bullied other boys for being nerds. And quite often it was physical bullying, So maybe there is something here to say about men wanting to bully those they deem different from the mass because of their interests, and women bullying men and women for not living up to certain standards because of their appearance or the way they speak.
On Wednesdays, we wear pink.
So that's something to think about, but it's also a whole different topic. So we know that online there's a huge wave of hatred towards romance and romantasy books. Where is that energy for hating on video games and franchise books? Where is the "this is not real literature" argument for World of Warcraft, Dragon Age, Star Wars? You get the "oh, what a loser, oh, what a nerd," but not the "you are ruining literature." Even the elitists hate more on romance books than they do on geeky books. And before you come at me for hating on Star Wars or whatever, look up there. Do you see it? Do you see a Darth Vader comic books? Do you see the WoW board game? Sit down. Another important thing to note when it comes to social media marketing, and especially the rise in popularity of the romance and romantasy genres and the constant publishing of new books, is that, according to research, women read more than men. The Deloitte article also points out that of the 10 best-selling male authors, readership was almost evenly divided by gender, with 55% male readers and 45% female readers. In contrast, only 19% of the 10 best-selling female authors' readers were male. Men also read fewer books with female protagonists than do women, a problem compounded by the fact that fewer books feature female protagonists overall. There is also a long history of women writers masking their gender, including the author of the wildly popular Harry Potter novels, Joanne Rowling, who writes under the gender-neutral moniker J.K. Rowling in an effort to be taken seriously and attract a wider share of readers. There are so many books being published every year, but we only see a select few which are boosted through social media. Hence, people buy them more, hence we see them more, and so on and so forth. And the reason why we now predominantly see women-dominated genres is because first, women read more than men, and second, there are actually far more women content creators than men. So it's rather understandable as a woman to want to read a book where the main protagonist is a woman. And now that these books are gaining so much attention, publishers would be rather dumb if they don't hop on the train and answer consumer demands. The problem comes when, because of social media popularity, the traditional steps of publishing, where you write and then you either self-publish or you query an agent and then you get a book deal, are replaced by, "Hey, you're popular, you have good ideas, we should write a book." And then you get Lightlark. Of course, a large following doesn't mean you get published, but your chances are higher, especially considering how writers are now expected to advertise themselves. This is particularly obvious in the self-help genre. This need for self-advertisement is not only for content creators turned writers. Brandon Sanderson is exceptional at self-advertisement, and I'm rather happy about it because we keep getting spoiled with great books. So while we are getting a ridiculous amount of mediocre books, we are also getting more from acclaimed authors whose works are also gaining social media popularity. It's not all that bad, really. When did abuse and toxic relationships become romantic? One of the most popular tropes is enemies to lovers, but that quite often takes the form of bullying or outright Stockholm syndrome. Lots of books describe relationships filled with manipulation, derogatory words, and even non-consensual acts. I don't take issue with writing about those topics. I take issue when those topics are romanticized and there's a lack of critical thinking and common sense on the reader's side. I am all for let people enjoy things as long as it's not harmful to other people. If you want to read Haunting Adeline, go ahead. That's your choice. If you want to recommend it to a friend, go ahead. But if you want to recommend it to a 16-year-old, shut up. If you see a 14-year-old buying it in a bookstore, say something. If you enjoying things equals spamming someone's accounts with inappropriate, borderline harassment comments. Shut up. It's kind of like how when we are consenting adults, we have a choice in our poison. And there are people who consume alcohol, or smoke, or take drugs, or doom scroll on TikTok. You've made that choice for yourself. But the moment you start pushing it on others, that's when it becomes a real problem. And that's when let people enjoy things goes out the window. Am I surprised that people are romanticizing criminals? No, not really. A police siren. Right on cue. Let me remind you that Ted Bundy had fangirls. That there are people who enter into relationships with prisoners over letters. The fascination with the macabre and crime in general is not something new. The problem is that with social media and the use of books, which are generally considered to be something good, it's now shoved in our faces, and most disturbingly in the faces of minors and vulnerable people. There was this big drama on TikTok revolving around people posting rather inappropriate comments on posts shared by a minor who was posting biker talk content. Now, I will not show you any of the boy's content because he is a minor, but just imagine grown-ass women recommending he reads smut, or writing, "We have to keep his innocence," or "We will protect you," and then commenting a variety of emojis. And for those of you who might be wondering why I keep mentioning haunting Adeline, here are the trigger warnings. Now imagine if the roles were reversed and it were grown men recommending porn to underage girls. Now imagine that that were your kid. Another drama on BookTok revolved around hockey players, when BookTok found a hockey player online and just made him the face of hockey smut. The team's PR decided that would be a great opportunity to gain popularity. So they started playing into the BookTok obsession. They also got a very prominent BookToker to go to one of their games, where she proceeded to shout rather sexual things at the players.
Damn, I'm trying to be in between his legs. Or in between my legs.
And then the dude's wife shared how uncomfortable all of that made them feel, especially considering how people were DMing the man with inappropriate sexual messages. And then all hell broke loose, because how dare they not accept the love of BookTok? You know what? Bring Tumblr back. When I was growing up, we had Tumblr for this stupidity. You were anonymous. You could speak all the idiotic things you wanted to say, and they would go straight to the void. You could just let it all out, and no one would A, care, or B, actually be affected in real life. So you could have your vent of anger, or frustration, or whatever. You could get your content, you could get your book recommendations, and all would be well in the world. On TikTok, the lines are so ridiculously blurred between fiction and reality, and people absolutely forget that they're talking to real people on the other side of the screen, that the content doesn't magically appear. Normal people have created it, and the majority are not celebrities and public figures. Some argue that by being a celebrity and putting yourself in the spotlight, you know what you're getting yourself into, and you're automatically consenting to whatever comments come your way.
I don't want to, I'm scared.
Which is not morally okay in any way, but who's asking me? And then they're also applying that logic to anyone who posts anything online, which is completely bonkers. A lot of people seem to forget that there are people of various ages on social media. And while you might be in your 40s and thinking you're talking to a peer, you might actually be talking to a 15-year-old. And for crying out loud, stop oversharing. Some things are meant to be private. Check yourselves. Check your behavior. We always find something to divide us. It's like we have a need for it. And with reading, it's not just about the genre you read, about having a mutual interest. It's about who reads the better literature. Historically, reading has been something the privileged did. First, it was only the rich and educated men. Then rich and somewhat educated women came into the picture, and now it's everyone. But we don't really like it when everyone can do something and enjoy it. Because surely not everyone is as smart as we are, has a deeper understanding of the world the way we do. Books are still expensive. The more you read, the more money you spend, hence physical copies of books are still a symbol of our economic status, but just not as much as before. Now we have to hang on to something else that will put us above other people. So today we have the classics reader versus everyone else, or literature talk versus book talk.
What story, what do you have to say that is this much? Guys, I love books, but is it ever this serious?
I have a difficult history with reading classics, and I fully blame the education system for that. Because of school, I refused to read any book that was labeled as a classic. I hated analyzing books. The whole, what did the author want to say, pissed me off. It didn't help that I actually didn't have to read any of the books we studied in school to get A's. I just had to listen in class and write essays. And maybe my dad is a little bit to blame, because he found a very interesting way to get me to read, which I'm still not sure if it were intentional or not, but it resulted in me finding every book we studied in school boring. One day, when I was maybe 10, I saw my dad sitting in his office and reading a book, and he was so focused on it that he paid me no attention at all. And he kept doing that for a few days. And of course, I was like, what are you reading? Can I read? And it was The Great Book of Amber. And then The Foundation. Then a friend from class let me borrow The Eye of the World, and I was lost to the world. When I got to high school, did I think myself better than everyone else who just read the classics? Yes, I did. Because I was the rebel. I was going against the norm, and I was reading above the level I was supposed to be reading at. I say that, and yet I still loved Twilight, and my room was covered in posters. Would Twilight have been a TikTok book? Absolutely. Did it succeed without TikTok? 100%. Same goes for 50 Shades of Grey. And what's their status now?
I've never felt normal.
They are memes. And that's what will most likely happen to the big TikTok books in a few years, when people outgrow them and move to a different stage in their lives. Are Pride and Prejudice and 1984 some of my favorite books? Yes. Does The Wheel of Time make up at least 30% of my personality? Also yes. All of these books are not mutually exclusive, and it's important to diversify what you read. What we globally know as classics is once again something that's predominantly viewed from the prism of Western Europe and the US, with some notable exceptions like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. But most countries have their own classics writers that don't fall within the well-known names worldwide. Bulgaria has its own Bulgarian classics writers that we study in literature classes. Now, if you have not read my classics, but I have read mine and yours, does that make me smarter than you? An article from The Guardian titled "The Big Idea: Do We Need to Dismantle the Literary Canon?" points out that when you commit to the notion of the best that has been thought and said, as conceived from one particular point of view, you automatically commit to whatever ideologies come in tow. Our curriculum is steeped in white supremacy, class and gender bias, and many other blind spots created by societal norms. It's no accident that white straight men dominate the canon because people with those identities have historically enjoyed privileges denied to others. Add the fact that formal education was largely designed to appeal to the sons of the aspiring Victorian upper middle classes, and it's no wonder that there is a leaning towards a particular kind of classic. What is considered a classic keeps evolving. In 100 years, we'll have added more titles from authors from our time, and some titles that are currently considered classics might disappear. It has happened before, it will happen again.
This is the Penguin Classics book, and I went all through it when this book first came out. And this is a book which just talks about all the many Penguin Classics that exist. There's a book called the Penguin Modern Classics. That is its companion. I made videos on both of those books. But there's a section in the back of this book called The Vaults. And it's this particular section that made me think of this particular topic. Allow me to read you this little paragraph here. These pages display some of the Penguin Classics titles that are no longer in print. Titles go out of print and drop off the list for the prosaic reason that low sales figures don't justify the cost of another print run. But each time one title falls away, it raises interesting questions. It implies that the way we remember literature is subject to change, that a classic may not always be a classic, that each title is required to maintain its position. It's like a battle to the death for classic literature. They're always fighting to maintain position, apparently. Anyway, as an author's star wanes, their marginal works might be pruned. Equally, a concerted cultural effort to champion or rehabilitate an author might lead to more of their works appearing or reappearing in the series. The list requires constant tending, weeding, grafting, and replanting. And as editors of the series, we might conclude with Candide that the most we can hope to do is cultivate our garden. So, this is a bunch of books that Penguin discontinued, you know, on account of them cultivating their garden and all that. So, this is a bunch of out-of-print classics, and Penguin is implying that, you know, some classics, they might not always be classics. Maybe we considered them classics at one time, and, you know, they stopped selling, so they're not classics anymore. I guess that's what makes a book a classic, you know, how much they sell. Apparently,
as I said earlier, books are expensive, and unfortunately, money don't grow on trees. Which is why I think it's important to be mindful of what we spend them on, and thus what we read. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we should only be investing in what we are told is the best literature. In the article Don't Let People Enjoy Things, Kate Wagner argues, simple escapism and entertainment value is not the aim of art, though it might well be the goal of enormous media conglomerates. I believe that Douglas Adams and Terry Pratchett would strongly disagree with this notion. I do agree that there is good and bad writing, and that some books are smarter than others, but I don't agree that reading is only for education or only to be conceived as art and not for entertainment.
A sonnet by Byron might score high on the vertical, but only average on the horizontal. A Shakespearean sonnet, on the other hand, would score high both horizontally and vertically, yielding a massive total area, thereby revealing the poem to be truly great. As you proceed through the poetry in this book, practice this rating method. As your ability to evaluate poems in this manner grows, so will your enjoyment and understanding of poetry.
Excrement. That's what I think of Mr. J. Evans Pritchard. We're not laying pipe. We're talking about poetry. How can you describe poetry like American Bandstand? Well, I like Byron. I give him a 42, but I can't dance to him. Now, I want you to rip out that page. Go on. Rip out the entire page. You heard me. Rip it out. Rip it out! Go on. Rip it out! Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Gentlemen, tell you what, not just tear out that page, tear out the entire introduction. I want it gone. History. Leave nothing of it. Rip it out. Rip! Be gone, J. Evans Pritchard, Ph.D. Rip, shred, tear, rip it out. I want to hear nothing but ripping of Mr. Pritchard.
There are elitists who believe that everything warrants deep thought and critique, and reading is not just for entertainment. But if you do hold such beliefs, aren't you just projecting on other people? Why are you trying to hold other people to your own standards when you should be focused on upholding those standards yourself? If you expect people to always read books and exercise critical thinking, you're expecting too much. I spent hours upon hours every day reading law textbooks. And sometimes I just want to read something simple, something stupid, something ridiculous, so my brain could finally rest. I don't want plot. I don't want beautifully woven sentences, complex ideas. I want stupidity. I want Brooklyn Nine-Nine, The Lost World, The Bachelor. And so I will read Assistant to the Villain and ACOTAR and fanfics, and when I'm not overwhelmed, I will read high fantasy and classics. In a way, trashy books are junk food. Sometimes you just need to have some Doritos or devour a Bueno. There's one thing we can never get back and we have a limited amount of, and that is time. I mean, we are all going to die, and we should be mindful of how we spend the limited amount of time we have. But I think a lot of people will hear that and think that that is why we should only be engaging with real and proper literature. But then where does the fun in life go if we apply that logic to everything? Books are not just a way to learn and grow. They're not just for education, they are entertainment. I mean, do I regret the time I spent reading Powerless? Absolutely, because I got neither education nor entertainment out of it. But do I regret reading ACOTAR? No, because it made me stop thinking when my head was exploding with stress, and it helped me relax in a fun and peaceful way. And is life worth living if there's no fun and peace in it? If you only read the books that everyone else is reading, you can only think what everyone else is thinking. Criticism is healthy. Hatred, mockery, and belittlement are not. To me, let people enjoy things narrows down to the following. You can criticize the book, you can hate the book, but don't hate the person who enjoys it. I will judge. You can't stop me from judging. I don't want to stop judging, but I don't judge the person. I use my judgment of someone's taste in literature not to filter out their friendship, but to filter out my book recommendations to them and their recommendations to me. Yes, what we read defines us to an extent. Of course it does. But our whole personality and sense of being is not and should not be tied to our taste in literature. While letting people enjoy things is important, it's also important to analyze and critique and discuss things. Because if we only praise things or we stay silent because we don't have anything nice to say, how is one supposed to improve? Or how is one to be held accountable? Critiquing something does not make you a classist or an elitist, but the more pressure is put on people to stop critiquing and to not say anything unless they have something nice to say, we begin to move towards the field of anti-intellectualism. Because apparently, thinking deeply about what you read and having an opinion on it becomes bad, and now it's only acceptable to consume media mindlessly. And then we plunge deeper into ignorance. If I think something was written poorly, I will explain why I think so. One day I will have consistent lighting, I promise. Today is just not that day. And that day probably won't come for a few months. Maybe a year, depending on how the channel does. But I will have consistent lighting at one point, okay? Okay. As I was saying, if I think something was written poorly, I will explain why I think so. Of course, when it comes to literary criticism, some of it is quite subjective, but it is also objective. There is a reason why people study literature as a subject. There is also an important difference between literary critique that explores the writing style, the language used, the what did the author want to say, and reviews, which can have elements of literary critique, but are more focused on personal taste and enjoyment. When I review a book, I try to do a mixture of both, because it just doesn't really seem fair to give a book 2 stars because it's not that well written plot-wise or style-wise, but at the same time, it made me feel good and it made me laugh. I think getting you to feel emotions is something that is quite often overlooked in this whole let people enjoy things debate. You can hate a good book, and you can love a bad book. Now, unfortunately, social media has really boosted our need for validation. People have to agree with us, like what we like, support us. And external validation brings along gratification. As Marcus Aurelius said, I have often wondered how it is that every man loves himself more than all the rest of men, but yet sets less value on his own opinion of himself than on the opinion of others. To some extent, I do understand the stan culture around some authors. If you comfort Terry Pratchett, I will fight you, okay? You cannot come for Terry Pratchett. But here is another question towards lovers of BookTok. Why do you feel so offended when someone criticizes your taste in books? Do you perceive it as an attack on your intelligence? And if you do, then isn't there an internal problem that you should be working on? And if you are someone who feels the need to attack someone's intelligence because you think they have a trashy taste in books, then you also have an internal problem you should be working on. I will fight against Terry Pratchett slander, not because I think you're offending me, but because I think you're offending Terry Pratchett, and that does not fly in my house. Let's not pretend that a lot of BookTok and BookTube creators don't enjoy jumping on the hate train for some popular books and classics just to be one of the few that don't like a certain book. You know, to be special. Such cloud-chasing content is rather obvious when the review is 2 sentences and you just get facial expressions and comments about the spice level, the vibes not vibing, or just overall enjoyment.
Just take a stroll. There it is. Left, right, left, out! If you notice, everyone started off with their own stride, their own pace. And I didn't bring them up here to ridicule them. I brought them up here to illustrate the point of conformity, the difficulty in maintaining your own beliefs in the face of others. Now, those of you, I see the look in your eyes like, I would have walked differently. Well, ask yourselves why you are clapping. And we all have a great need for acceptance. But you must trust that your beliefs are unique, your own, even though others may think them odd or unpopular, even though the herd may go, that's bad. Robert Frost said, 2 roads diverged in the wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. And I want you to find your own walk right now, your own way of striding, pacing, any direction, anything you want. Gentlemen, the courtyard is yours. You don't have to perform. Just make it for yourself. Mr. Dalton, you'll be joining us.
Exercising the right not to walk.
Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Just illustrated the point. Swim against the stream.
In a way, BookTok has become the AliExpress, Wish, Temu, Walmart version of AO3. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a site for fanfics, which has a substantial tagging system that helps filter out pretty much exactly what you're looking for. Books on BookTok now get reviewed and recommended based on the tropes that they contain. Enemies to lovers, sharing a bed, slow burn, fake dating, and the list goes on. The problem is that when you narrow down a book to its tropes, it oversimplifies the story, it spoils parts of the story, and it quite often miscategorizes and misrepresents the book. When I'm selecting a book, I don't just want to know what the tropes are. I want a well-written summary that's going to tell me whether the plot is interesting enough for me to read. Don't just tell me it's enemies to lovers. Reading a variety of different literature is good. It broadens your horizons, it enhances your language skills. But it is okay to have preferences. I, for example, struggle with reading about normal people. If there isn't a fantasy, sci-fi, murder mystery, adventure aspect to it, or if it isn't set in the past, I'm not going to read it.
Absolute waste of time. So fucking boring, Jesus.
I don't want to read about real people with real problems. I have enough of my own. The reason why tropes and tags work for fanfics is because when you decide to read a fanfic, you know which fandom you're looking for. You already know the original story, and you like it enough to go look for extra reading material. You already like the characters, and you pretty much know exactly what you're looking for. And they are written with so much love. And there's some really good ones out there. People actually bookbind their own copies. But when you apply the same system for categorization to books which you haven't read, you're really limiting the variety of books you read. And that affects the way publishing now works and the way authors write. At least from my observation, it seems like a lot of authors are now focusing more on having certain tropes in their books and how to include them in the story because they know their books will sell, than on actually developing their plot and building great characters. And when authors are chasing tropes and profit, the quality of their work diminishes, which is excusable for fanfic writers, but I don't think it's in any way excusable for professional authors. And a lot of the books that came out in the past few years kind of feel to me like Tumblr and fanfiction.net in 2013. There is nothing wrong with liking such books and sharing your love for them, but I think it's important not to confuse liking a book with it being a good piece of literature and representing it as such to other people. I heard some talk about BookTok promoting overconsumption, and as an avid reader, for a moment I was like, what do you mean overconsumption? You can't overconsume books. And then I thought about it more, and I thought there is some merit to the argument, but only when it addresses people who can't actually afford to buy a lot of books, but are driven by the trends, or by the urge to mark a book as read on Goodreads or Storygraph, and so they buy what they can't afford, and that drives them down financially. Especially if they buy books and then they don't read them, and then they just buy more books. But then I went on TikTok. First of all, this is a prime example of a few things. Capitalism, the fear of missing out, elitism, lack of care for the environment, lack of care for the influence influencers have on young people. I could go on. Let me tell you the story of how I learned that book overconsumption is bad. When I was a kid, maybe about 8 or 9 years old, my dad took me to a really big bookstore, got a cart, and told me I could fill it with as many books as I wanted. At that time, I was obsessed with two things: witch and horrible histories. Did I put every single book I could find from these series in the cart? Yes. Did I read all of them? No. Because while the history books covered different periods of history, the style was the same, so I got bored of them. Same with Witch. I did actually end up giving away my Witch collection a few years later, which I kind of regret, but what's done is done. Now I either buy books one at a time, or I make a reading list for the month of 3 to 5 books I want to read, and I buy only those books, and then I don't buy another book until I have finished the ones I have. Sticking to this has been a great financial decision. There is the alternative of reading on Kindle, which is cheaper and better for the environment. Unfortunately, I can't read on Kindle because, this is TMI, but I have very sensitive eyes. One of the things that pushes me to reach for a book and read a lot is the fact that my eyes can't take staring at a screen for too long. Which is ridiculous, because video editing takes a long time, and God knows how long this one is going to take me. Like and subscribe for money for eye drops. So when I want to rest my eyes, I reach for a book, because thankfully that doesn't make my eyes hurt, and I am sure there are other people with the same problem out there. There is also the option of listening to audiobooks, or you could get books from a library, or secondhand. There are options that are better for the environment and for your wallet, if you want to do well by the world and by yourself. Something important to keep in mind is that book prices vary around the world. The Eye of the World in the UK costs £6.99. In Bulgaria, it's £27.99 levas. The minimum wage in the UK is £11.44 per hour. In Bulgaria, it's 5 levas 58, which means that you only need to work 1 hour in the UK to afford a book. In Bulgaria, it's 5 hours. Being able to buy so many books is a privilege that is taken very lightly on BookTok.
You know it's bad when you don't even know what's in the box.
The book hauls and the hoarding of books that influencers cannot possibly read has just become another trend that gets people to watch and engage with the content. And it does also set unrealistic goals for a lot of young people. The fear of missing out is prevalent. This person has read that book, this video has this many likes, and these people have commented on it and they have read it already or are going to read it. Oh, it's the same with this creator. I should buy it too, and this one, and this one, and this one, and if I don't get it, I will be behind. Breathe. Reading books has turned into a competition. There are how to read more advice videos. Reading is now largely associated with productivity. People share their Goodreads reading challenges and stats at the end of the year. Here's my tip. Get off of TikTok. And just to set your mind at ease, according to research done by The Economist, only 54% of respondents said they read or listened to a book in 2023. Of those who did, the average was 11 books. By that count, if a 7-year-old began reading in 2023, they would get through roughly 770 books in their lifetime, according to ACOTAR tables. A 30-year-old might have around 500 left to read. Another aspect of overconsumption is the search for aesthetics, of organizing beautiful and packed bookshelves, which in itself is not a bad thing. It is bad if you're not reading the books you've bought and you just keep buying more books. But a lot of people actually just have a problem with pretty and organized bookshelves. Why is it frowned upon to have a library with fairy lights and toys and flowers and color? But it's praised if you have a darkish library with old, thick, leather-bound and hardback books, or just Penguin classics. There is a desire to tie ourselves with a certain aesthetic, like dark academia or coquette or old money, because it gives us a sense of belonging to a certain group. Elitists rage against people not properly engaging with literature. At the same time, there's rage against people who annotate their books and post aesthetic videos about it, because that makes them fake. Now, I get it when it really is a bit too much and then it just becomes another waste of paper. And sometimes I do wonder, what is there to annotate in ACOTAR? But honestly, at this point, you just can't please people. You're either not engaging or you're engaging but it's fake. I don't annotate per se, but I mark things with a pencil and then I dog-ear the pages. Yes, I dog-ear pages, okay? Those are my books. I can do whatever I want with them, and I like it when the book looks like it's been read and when the paper feels like it's been read. Okay? Okay. If we circle back to classism and real literature, we'll find our answer as to why pretty bookshelves and annotations are bad. Of course, this criticism of overconsumption and hoarding is not something new. Seneca criticized the Library of Alexandria itself for its collection of books, saying, "They had collected the books not for the sake of learning, but to make a show. Just as many who lack even a child's knowledge of letters use books not as the tools of learning, but as decorations for the dining room." Have you heard of the allegory of the cave? Back in around 380 BC, the ancient Greek philosopher Plato wrote about a group of prisoners who spent their whole lives inside a cave, chained so they could only stare forward at a wall. They weren't even allowed to move their heads. Behind them was a fire that cast shadows on the wall. Behind the wall, people carried objects and animals and had their shadows cast on the wall in front of the prisoners. The prisoners saw nothing but their own shadows, and the ones cast by the people walking behind them. One day, one of the prisoners escaped from the cave and finally saw the real world. He went back to the cave and explained what he had seen outside, but no one believed him. As always, Reddit pulls through and presents us with a good visual representation of the modern-day cave. Social media is our cave that we willingly enter and stay in. We only see content curated for us by the algorithm, which distorts our perception of reality. When we talk about echo chambers, we make the mistake of connecting them predominantly to political content. The BBC gives us a good definition of what an echo chamber is. A digital echo chamber is when everything on your feed reflects only your interests and views, without exposing you to new or differing opinions. This can make us feel that everyone thinks the same as us and only reinforces what we already think, and contributes to the spreading of fake news on social media. This is largely driven by our need for validation, that we're the correct ones, that the majority thinks the same as us, or that even though we are in the minority, we are nevertheless correct. And when someone proves us wrong, we twist and we twist until in some way we are correct again. When we do research, we only search for what will prove us right. When we try to recall a memory to prove our point, we will focus on the negative, or the information that will serve us best against the opposing side, even if we have information that serves the opposing side. This is what confirmation bias essentially is. So when we speak of BookTok and we complain about the same books, tropes, and trends being promoted, we shouldn't forget that BookTok is the cave that we have voluntarily walked into. The big difference between our cave and Plato's cave is that we do actually have somewhat of a say in what shadows we see, because the algorithm adjusts depending on the content we are interacting with. The For You page is for you. And the biggest difference between us and the prisoners is that we can actually leave whenever we want to. If you have such a huge problem with BookTok, why are you even on TikTok? Go read your books. Stop wasting your time.
I am in love with the fact that people now are like, light academia this and dark academia that. Like, back in my day, we called that being a nerd, and we used to get bullied for it.
When I was growing up, at most, there were 2 to 3 students in my classes that read books. My audacity as a reader and a special child stretched so far that my teachers let me read during class because they didn't want to dissuade me from reading. My classmates teased me a lot for it, and there came a point during high school when I stopped reading for a couple of years because whenever I pulled a book in school, kids would have something bad to say, and my teenage brain took that very personally. There was a girl I was friends with, and she studied a lot, and she always got good grades. And at the end, it turned out she actually hated me because I read for fun. Anyway, the point is that social media changed the narrative, and reading is now considered kind of cool, you know, something that popular people do. Insert hot girl books, or all of the read like this celebrity books, you know? When impressionable teens scroll through social media and see colorful and fun videos of people reading books, under which are hundreds, even thousands of comments discussing them, they do get a bit of a push to reach for a book. Which is great. The only real problem is the smut, but we've already discussed that. The thing is, before we had an issue with people not reading enough. But now that that's slowly changing, we must have an issue with what people are reading. Come on, do we want to be the thought police? It's great that people can so freely share their love of books. If one of my works was ever published, would I be happy to see it on TikTok? Absolutely. Not just because of the marketing, but because it would make me happy as a writer to see that people are actively talking about my work, be it good or bad talk. Because it would mean that I have managed to get people to feel something through my words, be it happiness or hate. Words hold a lot of power, and being able to wield them to evoke emotions in thousands of people, to get them to imagine what you've imagined while writing, is one of the greatest things a person can achieve. People build emotional relationships with books, which is something I think we often forget about. They can change the way we think about things. They can shape parts of us, and they can stick with us until the day we leave this world. There are books I reread every few years because I get something new out of them every time. Because as I grow as a person, so do my views and understanding of things.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world. Now, see that look in Mr. Pitt's eye? Like 19th century literature has nothing to do with going to business school or medical school, right? Maybe. Mr. Hopkins, you may agree with him, thinking, yes, we should simply study our Mr. Pritchard and learn our rhyme and meter and go quietly about the business of achieving other ambitions. I have a little secret for you. Huddle up. Huddle up! We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race, and the human race is filled with passion. Medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for.
Books are something very personal, and I find it beautiful when we can share with each other the journeys we've had while reading. I don't have a single friend who likes Colleen, Hoover, Fourth Wing, or Powerless. I have 2 friends who like The Cruel Prince and ACOTAR, and none of my friends will ever read Haunting Adeline. But do I still see a bajillion videos of people obsessed with BookTok and smut? Yes. But does it actually affect my life? Would it be a problem if a few of my friends enjoyed the smutty BookTok books? No. Then why should I really care? Because it's all over social media? Because there's a BookTok section in the bookstore? Why do you care so much? How is it impacting you? Think about those things. And if the only impact on your real life is that A, you find the videos annoying, fix your algorithm, or B, you can't get good book recommendations, fix your algorithm, or go on Goodreads and read some synopsis, or ask your friends or family or colleagues, or just go browse in a library or a bookstore. For real, how did you used to choose your books before BookTok became a thing? There are millions upon millions of books out there. We can survive without TikTok. We can survive without influencers telling us what to read. We've done so for hundreds of years. What social media has done is make us lazy. A lot of people will say, but we can't stay silent. We must speak out against injustice. If everyone stayed silent, there would never be progress. It is our civic duty. About TikTok videos. About other people's choice of entertainment. Are you sure about that? Is that what you want to dedicate your time to? Do you believe you're helping society? Are you sure there isn't a better and more impactful way if your goal truly is to tackle social issues? If you are sure, pause this video and dwell on that for a moment. Just dwell on it. Do call out people who are harassing others with their comments. Do monitor what your kids are reading. Do be more conscious of what you're spending your money on and with what type of content you're engaging. Think about this. What is within your control? We live in a period where everything and everyone is so intertwined because of social media and internet that we think that we should know everything that's going on around the world, that every social issue out there is our own issue as well. We have to constantly be in the loop with what's going on. What's the new thing that's causing outrage? Which company is being boycotted now? Which celebrity is being cancelled, and so on. And if we don't speak out against those things, we are, for some reason, then labeled as bad people. And of course, we believe that we personally have the power to change things. We end up losing perspective of what is materially affecting our lives and of what we actually have the power to change. The chief task in life is simply this: to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals not under my control and which have to do with the choices I actually control. Where then do I look for good and evil? Not to uncontrollable externals, but within myself, to the choices that are my own.